Good morning. Good morning. If you can hear me, clap once. Thank you. All right. My name is Françoise Girard. I'm the president of the International Women's Health Coalition, and I am very, very pleased to see the incredible level of interest for this panel on child marriage and maternal mortality, especially in rural areas, given the topic of the Commission on the Status of Women this year. So we have a fabulous session today where we're going to hear from voices from the ground, from women who are working at country level to end early and child marriage and also to stop maternal mortality, as well as some governments who are very committed to this agenda. But we will start first with a few thoughts about where we are with respect to maternal mortality and child marriage. We've had some good news last week. UNICEF reported that 25 million child marriages have been prevented in the last decade, and most of them in South Asia. And the sharpest decline was in India, where the practice is really prevalent, as you know. So that is great news, right? At the same time, UNICEF also reported that 12 million girls under 18 are married each year. And if we continue at that rate, 150 million additional girls will be married by 2030. So we still have a lot of work to do. Girls are often married against their will, at the whim of others. Coercion, stigma, and violence tend to play a role in that scenario. Child marriage, as we will hear, often drives early pregnancy, as the girl is expected to demonstrate her fertility very early on after her marriage. In a few other cases, the marriage follows the girl's often unwanted pregnancy. Either way, it's not a good scenario for the girl. And we know that complications from pregnancy and childbirth are one of the leading causes of death for girls aged 15 to 19 worldwide. And we also know that 9 out of 10 births to adolescent girls in that age range take place within the context of marriage. So there's clearly a close link between these two issues. And of course, we can do better. We have to do better. Gender equality is at the core of our work at the Commission on the Status of Women. And as we all know, we're living right now through a very transformative moment where women and girls are truly remaking the world. So now is the time to accelerate action. So we will start today, and we're grateful today to the missions of Canada, New Zealand, and Zambia for their own efforts in this area and for partnering with us today in securing this room and holding this panel. So first, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Blais, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada. Her Excellency Louise Blais has been the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York since September 2017. She has special responsibility for Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And prior to that, she's held numerous positions within Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and has served abroad at the Canadian embassies of Paris, Tokyo, and Washington, D.C. So welcome, Ambassador Blais.
Voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Girard.
So pleased to be here with you today. I'm especially pleased to be here alongside colleagues from Zambia, with whom we collaborate very closely with our biannual UNGA resolution on child and early forced marriage. We also work very closely with New Zealand on the CEFM and maternal mortality, and we value our partnerships with the International Women's Health Coalition, which provides great expertise in this area. Canada's Feminist International policy places gender equality and empowerment of women and girls at the center of our international assistance. As part of this, Canada is committed to addressing the unacceptably high rates of sexual and gender-based violence experienced by women and girls, including child and early forced marriage. The Government of Canada is firmly committed to working with our partners to end child and early forced marriage. It is an abuse and a violation of girls' human rights, which impacts that are profound and very far-reaching. It jeopardizes girls' health and can significantly increase the risk of early and frequent and unintended pregnancy, maternal and newborn mortality and morbidity, obstetrics, fistula, and sexually transmitted infections including HIV/AIDS. It can also impact their education, makes them more vulnerable to violence, and keeps them from reaching their full potential and fully contributing to the development of their families, communities, and their countries. Child early and forced marriage and adolescent pregnancies are closely linked, as was just mentioned, with child and early forced marriage being either a driver or a consequence of early pregnancy. 90% of adolescent pregnancies in the developing world are to girls who are early married. Complications in pregnancy and labor are the leading cause of death in girls aged 15 and 19 globally. Across all regions, girls who live in rural areas are more likely to become child brides than their urban counterparts. Access to sexual and reproductive health and rights are critical to advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women and adolescent girls. Lack of attention to sexual and reproductive health and rights contributes directly to maternal mortality, poor health, and the disenfranchisement of women and girls. Canada supports the goal of ensuring that every pregnancy is wanted, every birth is safe, every child and woman is treated with the dignity and the respect that she deserves. We will only achieve the Sustainable Development Goals if we make progress in addressing gender equality and ensure that women and girls are able to make decisions about their bodies and their future. Canada is pleased that through the collective actions of governments, civil society, UN organizations, the prevalence of child early and forced marriage is decreasing globally. This is very good news. The proportion of women who are married as children decreased 15% in the last decade. New data from UNICEF shows that ending child early and forced marriage is possible. With 150 million girls still at risks of being married by 2030, we must build on this momentum that all girls have, so that all girls really have the opportunity to thrive. Since October 2013, Canada has announced over 90 million in new targeted programming on CEFM, including support of Canadian and international civil society partners such as Girls Not Brides, UN agencies, and many grassroots organizations in developing countries. Child early and forced marriage is a complex and multifaceted issue requiring engagement at all levels of government and all sectors of society. Canada welcomes the leadership of governments and individuals in high-prevalence countries working to end child and early forced marriage. Je vous remercie beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Canada. Thank you, Canada, for your leadership on this. Now let me tell you how this panel will go. I will be the moderator and therefore, directing traffic and questions and so on. We will first hear from our three panelists who are from Cameroon, Nepal, and Pakistan, and who are working closely on the ground to end child marriage and stop maternal mortality in their own communities. So we'll hear from them. I will ask them some questions. After that, I will invite our colleagues from Zambia and New Zealand to make a few remarks as discussants based on what they heard, and I have a question for them, in fact. And then once we're done with that, we will open it up for questions from the floor. We'll have time for a few questions only, I'm afraid, but we wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to participate. Zainab is the Research Monitoring and Evaluation Manager for Aahung, an organization that aims to improve sexual and reproductive health in Sindh province in Pakistan, and they're based in Karachi. She previously worked in the peace and reconciliation field, but because that wasn't hard enough, she transitioned into sexual and reproductive health and rights. So Zainab, tell us, your organization, Aahung, runs a program called Life Skills-Based Education in over 500 schools in Sindh province in Pakistan. And this is a big province. There's 70 million people living in Sindh province. Tell us what life skills-based education is and how does it help to reduce child early and forced marriage?
Okay. Thank you, Francois. So life skills-based education is a form of education that focuses particularly on cultivating soft skills in students, and soft skills including decision-making, critical thinking, self-reflection, and effective communication. So through LSBE at Aahung, we make adolescents and youth aware about their sexual and reproductive health and rights, along with bodily rights, so that the young girls and boys, they'll be aware about their rights, so that they could be actively involved in negotiating for their own rights. So the LSBE program has helped to prevent marriages through empowerment of girls at the foundation stage. We've seen that schools become an entire ecosystem for change, and we are focusing on the students, but we are focusing on the students through parents, the teachers, and the community altogether. And we've also noticed that it's really important because we focus on the other stakeholders as well, so it helps the students to create an enabling environment for girls or boys so that they can claim their rights, which are otherwise very challenging to claim if the environment is not very enabling.
And because I know the program quite well, I know that you're trying to change gender norms, you know, from an early age, the role of boys and girls in the family and society, and addressing taboos with respect to sexuality and sexual abuse, which is a big problem in Pakistan. It seems like a very long-term kind of structural approach to preventing child marriage and to improving lives. Are you persuaded, Zainab, that this is the right approach? And why? Because it seems such a long-term way of dealing with some very pressing issues.
Well, it is indeed a very long-term approach, but what we need to understand over here is that as much as it is a physical and a social problem, it's a traditional problem as well. So it's an issue of changing mindsets. And it is definitely going to take a very long time. It won't just happen overnight. So, but I think what's really important over here is that we can't work in isolation with students only, which is why it's very important to work with the parents, with the community at large, and involving all these key decision makers in order to make it work out.
And what about maternal mortality, since this is one of the topics of this panel? Can life skills-based education, LSBE, also help with that? Apart from the fact that it can delay child marriage, what else? What kind of information do you give young people that would help them avoid dying in childbirth?
So as part of LSBE, what we do is we give information around contraceptives, along with giving them information about the negative consequences of early and forced marriage. And also, we focus explicitly on birth spacing, that the ideal time that's required for birth spacing. So I think those are the three main things that we focus through LSB.
And you were telling me that you needed to tell young girls about the realities of marriage. Why is that necessary in Pakistan?
So I think
they know, no?
Well, I think the entire idea of marriage it's glorified so much. The entire idea of marriage is glorified. That young girls from a very young age, they start dreaming about getting married because the kind of clothes which they get, all the jewelry which they get during their marriage. So I think, which is why they're never taught what are the actual physical or social consequences of early age marriage. So I think it's just the idea of glorifying of marriage is often people don't actually tell the young girls that what could be the consequences of it.
And we have good news from Pakistan also, which we welcome. The program, Life Skills-Based Education, is actually being ramped up right now from 500 schools to 47,000 schools. Yes, yes. Yeah, the Ministry of Education of Sindh province decided that it was time. It was time to address a number of issues, including child abuse and child rape. And so they've asked Aahung to train 1,000 teachers, master teachers, in the next 60 days. So it's a very exciting time. Ask Zainab, since the program in Pakistan deals with boys and girls, it's not just girls, how you tackle these issues of boys' attitudes and changing their vision of the world, of what's possible.
I think so. Some of the dynamics which I've personally seen in the classrooms is they're very interesting because these both boys and girls, they're taught gender, and gender is taught in the same class, like it's taught together. Whereas when we come to puberty, that's taught separately to make it more culturally appropriate. However, what I've personally seen is that in classrooms, when we're talking about gender roles and gender identity, particularly with boys, then they tend to have very liberal ideas, I would say, about it. And this is primarily as a result of LSB, because most of these schools we are working in are in low-income areas. So a lot of their values and beliefs are very patriarchal in nature. But when we see the students, the boys, who are coming from the same patriarchal backgrounds, they tend to have different perception about gender roles and gender identity, which is, I think, a very nice thing.
And you're able to do that because you do role play and other exercises that actually...
A lot of participatory activities. So we teach gender not only through, like, theoretically, but also through role playing, through a lot of games. So we have also introduced a lot of games and through which we are teaching about gender.
Thank you. As you know, as you heard, there's a lot going on, lots of activity already on the ground, lots of programs, lots of progress, both on child marriage and on ending maternal mortality. We know a lot of the solutions and the approaches and the strategies. We just need to invest in them and sustain our efforts. So in closing, I would like to allow the Deputy Permanent Representative of Canada to say a few words, since she wasn't participating in the discussion, to say a few words on the way out. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Girard.
Much, Mrs. Girard, and I'm sorry that we cannot allow everybody to ask, to raise their questions, but we are limited in time by our schedule.
Panel. I personally have learned a lot. I guess I just want to say one thing. I guess two, but very briefly. This really today, I didn't come here prepared for what I ended up feeling. I had forgotten just how lucky I was growing up and the access that I had to both social mores that allowed me to choose my spouse at a later age and also have the children when I wanted to. But even then, I nearly died giving birth with my first son, and it is clear that if I had been in a rural area, remote, even in my own country in Canada, I would not have survived, and nor would my child. I went on to have another child. So to just hear today what women are facing around the world has really brought it home to me that it happened to me. And these are not just statistics. These are real lives. These are real women. These are real children. And we really have to never, ever lose sight of their plight, even if they're out of sight and out of mind, because they are in rural areas. Alors vraiment, j'en ai presque la larme.
Really, I am almost tearing about that crying, because it's a very important matter. And I would like to thank everybody, men, women, and to be here with us, and also thank the panelists and Mrs. Girard, who really had a very inspiring implication. So thank you very much.